Hi everyone,
Hello.
welcome to week 4 Hangout. It's me, Krysta again, and this time we have Laura with us instead of Vicky. So hopefully we can get some more viewers and everyone can ask their questions. Otherwise,
Hello.
we'll just wait a few more minutes maybe to see if more people will join us. But we'll get started soon.
I do actually have 0 viewers.
Yeah, it did take like 2 minutes.
Yeah, we'll just wait. Hopefully, some viewers will pop up. There were people posting kind of messages before we started this. Hopefully, they're going to join.
So we can see if anyone's asked a question here.
Going to watch. Oh, hello.
No questions yet, just a bunch of hellos.
It's not a physiological thing.
Yeah, someone is asking on the
Oh, sorry. Let's just see if we have any viewers yet to tell us about. So maybe we'll wait until people pop up instead of just. Oh, there.
Hello, first viewer.
You got us to yourselves at the moment.
Yeah.
2. Here we go. Should we reintroduce ourselves then? Once more viewers pop up?
That's a good idea.
We'll just wait another minute just to see if we can get more people joining. Oh, yeah. Krysta and I are big fans of Sports Direct. Oh no, we're back down to 2 from 3. Oh dear.
Oh well, maybe we'll just get going then, and we'll see how things go.
And this will be posted online anyway, so if you've missed the beginning and you want to catch up, you can see it on the Coursera page once we get it loaded.
Yeah. Let's just quickly go to that question there before that someone was asking on the Google Plus page. So they said week 4 test question 10 asked for behavioral signs of negative welfare. I got the question wrong, and they stated hunched appearance and ruffled feathers was a sign of negative welfare, a behavioral sign of negative welfare. I think that this is a physical sign of negative welfare. Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I think the person maybe stated the question wording is not quite right, because hunched appearance and ruffled feathers is a behavioral sign of poor welfare. So if they clicked that and it was wrong, then, well, I think maybe they misread the question and it probably asked for physiological signs of poor welfare. So maybe just go back and see, reread the question a little bit more closely. If you still think there's an issue there, then bring it up on the forums and we can address it there. But I don't think there is. Yeah, if there is, let us know.
Yeah, it's certainly a change in behavior or physical appearance, but it's not physiological, so it has nothing to do. I mean, it might be related to physiological symptoms, but it in itself isn't related to, say, hormone cascades or something going on in the gut. I thought there might have been a confusion between
physical
and physiological.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I can see that now.
Right, and just because we've now got more viewers, because this is my first hangout, just to reintroduce myself, I'm Laura Dixon, so I've been responding to some comments in the forum and whatnot, but this is my first hangout, and Krysta's an old pro now, so I'm going to let her read.
Yeah, you've seen me in the previous Google Hangouts as well as on the forums, and this week Vicky is not able to join us for the Hangout, so we've got, it's Laura and myself, and next week it'll be Laura and myself as well. So keep the questions coming in. We see there are a few popping up here and there, but maybe we'll talk a bit about some of the common threads that are coming up on the forums, and also the survey results from the Quality of Life or a Life Worth Living survey that we had posted this week. So I don't know if any of you who are viewing at the moment did the survey, but there was 3 questions or 3 scenarios that we presented in the survey.
Sorry, can I just interrupt for a second? We're going to try something we've not done before, which is share screen. Just because it might be a bit easier for you to see the questions and then see the scales we answered on while we talk about it. But bear in mind, we've not done this before, so this might not work at all. Do we want to start with the question and then go to this
Yeah.
one? All right, so hopefully this works for you. If not, apologies. We will just briefly go over the questions, but hopefully you can also see it on the screen just to make life a bit simpler.
Yeah.
Sorry
Don't
to
forget that to post questions on the Hangout, you have to be signed in to your Gmail account. So please, if anyone's signed in now, could you just let us know if you can see that or not? Can't see. It won't be our faces. It'll be there's some text. We're not getting any feedback, so I'll just assume that that's positive and you can see. Okay.
So this is the life worth living exercise that was posted, and we'll just briefly go over what the questions were and your responses, and then discuss the responses a bit because they're interesting. And it's interesting because it gives us an idea maybe of your background or kind of your ethical or personal views as well.
Okay, so, okay, I'll read the question out and then we can discuss how you responded to it. So I guess we should say right off the bat, is almost 300 people responded to the survey. So we did get quite a range of responses, but obviously we're still going to keep it open and hope for more. But the first example was, pretend you're a farmer. I am rearing 40 broiler or meat chickens at my small holding. They have a dry shed with litter on the floor, food and water, and access to a grassy pasture with tall hedges down two sides for shelter. 4 of the birds are a lot smaller than the others, but they are still growing. The birds can trap mud and water into their house, so the litter is often damp, especially for flocks reared in the winter. About half of the birds are seen ranging at any one time. 2 birds have died and were found to be infected with erysipelas, which can be transmitted by vermin, sheep, or wild birds. Oh, perfect. Yes, we're seeing that people can see the screenshot.
Good.
Yeah.
Oops. Crap. And now I've ruined it, but now hopefully there.
So, yes, you were asked to rate this situation based on what you think the bird's quality of life or welfare scale would have been. So I think the options were either in the red zones with poor welfare, the bird was better off dead, so it's not a life worth living at all. The orange zone, which is a little bit better, but still not an acceptable quality of life. The yellow zone, which is an acceptable quality of life, but nothing exciting or positive about their life. The blue zone, which is a little bit better, and then the green zone, which would be kind of the gold standard, good quality of life with the presence of positive emotions as well as just the absence of negative ones. So from that, of the 300 people that responded, 4% said that those birds were living a good life, so would have been scoring in the green zone and had a life worth living, a good quality of life with the presence of positive emotions as well. And then we went up to 19% when we went to the blue zone. So about a fifth of everyone thought that the birds were living a good life, but it wasn't quite the gold standard. And then down to the yellow zone was about 30% of respondents said that the birds were had an acceptable quality of life, but nothing terrible, but nothing overly positive about it either. And then up to 44% in the orange zone, which was better than being dead, but not quite an acceptable quality of life. And then again, 4% in the red zone, which would be, again, better off dead. So you can see that there was people scoring in all of the categories, but with the majority of people scoring in the middle categories, so sort of hinging towards the red zone, so into the orange zone more or less, but people in general thought those birds were living a life worth living, but nothing was exceptionally positive about that life.
So maybe they had a lack of perhaps overtly negative welfare, but weren't experiencing a lot of positive welfare.
Yeah. So maybe we go to number 2.
Okay, I'll try to do it better this time.
But
it should. Oh, I was hoping it would switch over, but I don't think it switched it. Oh, we'll get there eventually, won't we? Sure. You're going to be sick of Canadian accents by the end of this. So example 2 was, again, you're imagining you're a farmer. and you have 1,000 laying hens in furnished cages of 20 birds per cage. And they have access to perches, nesting areas, scratching areas, flash shortening devices, food and water. And the shed is artificially lit with lights on for 14 hours a day. And the shed is kept at a constant temperature of about 21 degrees Celsius. The scratching area has litter dispensed onto it once a day, but only 3 or 4 hens have the chance to peck and scratch at it before it's depleted. And in a few of the cages there have been some feather pecking, and 5 birds have died or been culled due to pecking injuries. Also, 6 birds have died due to egg production-related diseases, such as egg peritonitis. So, yeah. So back to our scale again. Share that. Great. So yeah, if I could borrow your so again, same scale as before, and we'll start off the good quality of life, gold standard, positive emotions. Only 1% of you felt that that's where these birds were. Moving on to the blue area, 3% felt that it was, better than acceptable quality of life, but not the gold standard. 20% of you felt that it was an acceptable quality of life or a life worth living. 50% were down in the orange area, so not an acceptable quality of life, but not so bad that you might as well just kill all the animals. But 25% of you actually did think that this was a life not worth living and that these animals would have been better off dead. So again, we're getting a skew towards the yellow, orange, red side of this graph. It's not a graph, pardon me, a picture. Could be a graph. So these birds, again, that you don't feel that they have, they certainly don't have a lot of good welfare, positive emotions, positive things happening to them. And in fact, there are some negative things happening. Their quality of life might be acceptable, but it might actually be so bad, depending on your own viewpoint, that you think that they perhaps should just be culled, that it's not fair for them to keep living in this environment.
Yeah, I'm curious to know if the reason for people skewing it so much to the left-hand side or to the red zone is just due to the cages themselves, or if it's due to the fact that though mortality overall was still only 1.1%, if you look at 11 birds dying out of 1,000, we did see some mortality due to injurious pecking or feather pecking or cannibalistic type pecking. So I wonder if that's what's skewing it, or if it's just the cages in general. So yeah, some feedback on that. If you're willing to share kind of what you scored on this survey, or if you just have an opinion in general. Anyways, that would be nice to see some discussion happening there.
Yeah, what would influence your decision more about the quality of life? Would it be because there's been some mortalities and some egg-related production diseases, or is the fact that they're in a cage itself automatically skewing you to a poorer welfare standpoint?
I think Vicky might, Vicky and us might decide to sort of post the final results, or not final, but results once we get a few more respondents, and sort of set up a forum thread so that we can get a bit more discussion and see where people are at and why they decided to choose different categories for the different scenarios.
A summary of the results, so we can continue discussion. Mm-hmm. All right, next question. Here we go. Oh, of course. Oh, me and technology. There we go.
Okay, so the last and third one was, I have 10 laying hens in my back garden where I have kept hens for more than 15 years. They have a dry hen house raised off the ground with solid floors and straw, perches, 3 nest boxes, food and water. All of the birds come outside every day. The shell strength and shell color have been poor in this flock, and the veterinarian has examined the birds and diagnosed roundworm. One hen has disappeared, and we think that the local fox got her. So, going back again to our scale, this time the responses were a bit more skewed to the right, so in terms closer to the green or gold standard quality of life. So 22% were in the green zone, 36% in the blue zone, 28% in the medium or the yellow zone, 13% in the orange zone, and then 1% in the red zone. I would really like to know what the 1% thought for the red zone. Is it because the fox caught the hen, or is it because keeping animals is wrong just overall, or was it a mistake? Someone clicked it by accident. But yeah, any comments would be interesting to hear back. But yeah, so we're getting most of the respondents then from yellow upwards to green. So yeah, over 85% from yellow on to green. So I think I can agree with the sort of assessment for this is that you're having flocks and they're kind of pets and they seem to be having a good quality of life. The litter is dry.
Individual attention.
We get a more natural life. But keep in mind that even though we've only lost one hen to a fox, if you look at it on a proportion or percentage scale, that's 10% mortality. So it's quite high. As well, pretty much probably 100% of the birds are infected with the parasite. So again, we're getting some disease there, which could be impacting on quality of life and welfare. So yeah, it's interesting to see where people are scoring for these things. And so we've got a comment here about the caged one. So I guess that's the scenario too, is that in the UK, cages are viewed very negatively. Yeah, I agree. I think the public, I think in general, do view cages in a negative light. Not just within the UK, but in other parts of the world as well. But it's surprising though, because still more than half the eggs that are coming out of the UK have been produced from birds housed in furnished cages. So it is still making up quite a bit of the market. And I think it's probably due to the cost of the eggs as well. So free range eggs obviously are costing a bit more to produce as well as to purchase than the caged eggs.
Yeah, this was, I think, mentioned in one of the lectures that if you ask the public, they are concerned about where things are produced and how the birds are housed and bird welfare. But then when they actually go to the market and they actually spend their money, they don't always follow up the beliefs with their purchasing power. So they still are buying eggs from cages because they're cheaper.
Right.
And just something else, just when I looked at these questions, one thing I did out of interest was to calculate the total mortality for all three scenarios. For our first scenario, the broiler scenario, we had 5% mortality. For the laying scenario, we had 1.1% mortality. And as Krysta said, for our backyard flock, we had 10% mortality. And obviously, that was one bird, and if that one bird didn't go missing or die, you would have a 0% mortality. But even so, overall, we've rated the scenario with the highest mortality with the best welfare. And that to me is interesting because it means we're obviously not just using mortality as a welfare measure, which we shouldn't. But it is something that's quite commonly used in assurance schemes or as a way of assessing an overall larger flock's mortality or welfare, the welfare standards that are going on. So do you want to wrap up on that please now?
Yeah. If anyone has any comments, obviously they're more than welcome whenever you can send them across. But yeah, we'll wrap up with that and we can move on to some of the other points because we're getting a few questions, but not as many as we could. So yeah, keep the questions coming in. If you have any, feel free to ask them.
Or if you just want to offer your opinion on why, say with this life with living exercise, why you might have rated a scenario as you did, I'd be interested to hear that. Because it does seem like perhaps just looking at your results, and we will try to post a summary of this later, but hopefully we'll get more respondents. But there just does seem to be an overall bias that the cage scenario was seen as more negative, even though it had the lowest mortality, than a broiler situation or this backyard type flock.
Yeah, I'd also be curious to see at what point an outside laying hens in a more natural or backyard flock, at what point would their mortality have to be before you said, oh no, this is, I'll scale it down a bit and rate them closer to the red zone. Obviously, it's, other factors come into play, and it's not just the mortality that would skew your decision one way or the other. But say if we had a really high level of feather pecking in the backyard hens and a lot of them were evolved, but everything else was the same, or say we didn't even have any mortalities but a lot of feather pecking, how would that change your view of the backyard flock? And if we didn't have any mortality in the cage system, how would that change your view?
Yeah.
If we didn't have any feather pecking.
Yeah, if the cage system was, feather pecking free, their birds were dying from egg production diseases. Would that then influence yours? The fact that they're in a cage and thus very limited in their natural behaviors, kind of the overarching reason that this is quite a negative system.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on. And there's been some interesting discussions on the forums. Anyway, this week wasn't too heavy in terms of actual content, well, at least as from what we can tell. Maybe week 3 and week 2 seem to have a bit more, novel knowledge that maybe people haven't been exposed to before. So this week was a bit lighter, but it was quite heavy in terms of the ethics and the welfare side of things. So I guess the discussions potentially could have been a bit more heated than in previous weeks. So we did get some people commenting on the 5 freedoms. I think Vicky had mentioned this in at least one of the lecture videos. This is the 5 freedoms. A lot of people said that on the forum said they didn't agree with them and thought that it was a sort of a ploy to sort of say that commercial production is okay if you can meet these 5 freedoms. And so we agree that yes, the 5 freedoms are commercially based, and it's not an ideal or a gold standard in terms of the best welfare. And so you wouldn't necessarily see, if you complete or meet all the 5 freedoms, you wouldn't necessarily have birds always landing in the green zone of that on that welfare or quality of life scale. But it's somewhere to start, and it's also meant to reduce sort of negative aspects of welfare rather than trying to promote positive emotions or positive states of welfare. So, yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
And I mean, it is true that the 5 freedoms did come about. A lot of it was Ruth Harrison's book, Animal Machines, which did focus on production or factory farming. So the 5 freedoms were designed with larger scale production in mind. And one of the things to kind of remember is that the number of birds worldwide, the largest percentage of them are housed in production systems. So even if you can slightly improve their welfare, you're then reaching a much larger number of birds than if they just tried to base these on maybe more of a gold standard, but a less achievable standard that production couldn't achieve. So they are just trying to improve things overall, and having these 5 freedoms there, these standards that need to be met, do mean that the birds are housed with better welfare than if you looked at countries where these regulations don't exist. So, for example, Krysta and I are from Canada, where there's still battery cages, and while you might not like colony or enriched cages, they certainly are a step up from battery cages. So while we might not be giving the birds great welfare, we're improving their welfare, decreasing the negatives, and we're actually reaching a really large proportion of birds doing this. It's really difficult to read and talk at the same time.
It is, exactly, yeah. So there's, I think it's genetic, and it's saying birds that are allowed to free range and express natural behaviors have by far a better quality of life than caged birds. I would, in general, agree with that statement, but I think there are some caveats that go along with that. So I don't think that all free-ranging situations would always have a better welfare than caged birds, but in general, my personal opinion would be along the same lines as yours, Jeanette. But I think it depends on a number of factors as well. So if the range that they're on isn't appropriate and it's muddy and it's always raining and parasite, yeah. So then I think there's a large number of factors that can come into play, not just looking only at the production system, and that's why I think it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly where an animal's scale of state of welfare would be along that scale, and that's why we're getting such a big diversity throughout these surveys as well.
Yeah, in a lot of these systems, it's down to management. So you can have really good managed cage system where the birds may have better welfare than a really poorly run free-range system. But I think the general consensus is that if they're both run really well, then most people would agree that free-range is better welfare. But unfortunately, they're not all really well run, and that's where you run into the problem. And so even just, assuming they're going to a supermarket and always getting free-range eggs, you don't necessarily know that those free-range birds have had really good management and therefore as good welfare as they possibly can. It's a really difficult issue.
Yeah. Jeanette, I see that you're asking for more explanation. Is what we said all right, or would you like to talk a bit more about that?
Well, if you want, say a really good cage system might have somebody who examines the birds, who walks the sheds multiple times a day, actually stops to look at the birds, so notes birds who aren't behaving as they would expect or who are behaving differently from the flock. You can pick those birds out, you can separate them into sick pens or cull them if needed, so that the bird's welfare isn't being compromised by being left to die in the cage. They maybe are running the scratch feeder more often, so the birds are getting more opportunity to forage. They might be reducing their stocking density, so the birds have more room per cage. Whereas you could have a free range producer who, barely glances at his birds. He's got birds who have heel bone fractures, birds who maybe have maybe the litter's gone bad, that's calf litters and they're not getting to forage, or just wet patches, so they're getting hop burns, breast blisters. Maybe like Krysta said, the range is quite mucky and muddy, so again, it's not actually fulfilling the foraging needs. And again, the birds are then getting dirty and tracking wet mud into the sheds. Again, and maybe they're not doing anything to try to limit the amount of predation, so you could get foxes that are maybe sneaking into the hop pools and scaring the birds and killing some of them. So it's very individual with how things are being managed. Hopefully that explains enough. If not, let us know. We can try to explain further. And now I've lost the train of thought.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the 5 freedoms, and how they were designed more for production systems than for even looking at your own pet animals. They weren't designed as an aid to how you should look after your dog, for example. They were for production standards. They're not gold standards, they're just guidelines, and really they're the minimum guidelines, and then that's where your assurance schemes come in. So the assurance scheme should improve welfare from the 5 freedoms, so it should have even better level of welfare than your bottom standard of the 5 freedoms. And in some of these gold schemes, they may think about trying to improve positive aspects of welfare, but again, they still just might be trying to decrease negative aspects of welfare, but it still would be an improvement from your non-accredited scheme farms. And again, this is also a difficult issue because to be part of an insurance scheme, obviously you would want to be assured that the farms are meeting the standards. And this means farm inspections, people going out and trying to verify this. And it's time limited in time and money to how well this can be done. So certainly I'm sure some producers are joining them because they would then get a premium, and they're not doing it, say, for the right reasons, and not doing it to the best of their ability. But I know there are producers out there who are doing this because they do want to produce better quality products and have the birds treated better. So it's like everything else, where yes, it's not perfect. The welfare should be a bit better. People who are in charge of validating the farms who are in these schemes are doing their best to make sure they are all complying. But if you're the kind of person who really wants to get around these things, yes, you probably potentially could be, and just be on the scheme for the extra money in it.
Yeah, I agree with what Laura was saying. There was some discussion on the forums that the welfare schemes were just money-making tools to sort of increase profit for farms that pretend that they have better welfare. And like Laura was saying, potentially this is the case in some situations, as you see in all things. There's not always going to be it's not a perfect world. But I think the welfare schemes, yes, it is obviously a business, and of course the schemes themselves are set up as a business to make money, and the farmers do get a premium from that as well. But I think in the grand scheme of things, the welfare schemes are set up to provide consumers with the assurance that they are getting a better product, even if they are paying a bit more, so that they're getting a better, a bird or eggs that come from, chickens or eggs that come from birds that have a better quality of life. And yes, this might not be, again, ideal, or you might not think it's as good as a pet situation or a backyard flock, and it probably isn't, but it is better than the standard, and just trying to improve on different welfare aspects that you would see in a general commercial situation.
I'm just reading one of the comments. Thomas and Kimberly have had some feral cats chase around their chicks. So I guess predators come in all shapes and sizes, not just foxes.
Yeah.
Although once your birds get bigger, they might be able to give the cat a run for its money. At least my birds can. Shall we move on to kind of another topic that was discussed a bit on both in the forum and the lecture, and that's it was Dorothy McKeegan's lecture talking about ethics, and she mainly focused on kind of an animal rights viewpoint and an animal welfare viewpoint. And what a number of comments have been made that there's actually a number of kind of viewpoints in between where you're not so far into the animal rights that you don't feel that, all animals are individuals and that we need to just abolish all farming. And actually, to be a true animal rights, this you shouldn't even be okay with pet ownership or anything like that. And then going up to animal welfare, where you're still happy to use animals, but you want them to have as good a life as possible while you're using them. And this is, again, this week seems to be, it's difficult, it's an ethical issue, so it's not hard science, it's more of a philosophical, debatable issue. And it's also just very much influenced by your own personal beliefs, society, culture. Where you live probably has an effect on some of your ethics. So it's one of these things where you're not necessarily just all going to slot into a nice, neat little category. And you probably have a number of different viewpoints. For example, I'm a vegetarian, but I have friends who call themselves vegetarians, but will still eat fish, and that's because they don't believe that fish either aren't necessarily sentient or haven't been proved to be definitively sentient, and so they're still ethically okay eating fish, whereas I would rather take a more conservative approach and give fish the benefit of the doubt until it's, well, probably wouldn't eat them anyway, but that it's if they are sentient or non-sentient beings. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I don't know.
The questions are confusing me because they're not actually coming in a.
I know, and they kind of jump around.
Yeah, it's just kind of randomly flopping questions around. So.
I don't know if you can believe it. What's that in here?
Let's see. Oh, you can. Look at that. All right, yeah, I can start then. So, we'd be interested to know kind of what your viewpoints are as well, what your ethical basis for what you do is. Are you happy to eat all meat? Would you prefer that it be part of a predator insurance scheme? Maybe just farmers markets or friends that you know who raise animals? Would you be happy to raise your own meat? Because for me, this is, if you definitely want to be assured of the welfare of your food you're eating, then raising it yourself is a great way to do that because you can guarantee exactly how the animal is going to live. But then I know a lot of people have a problem when it comes to the end, and especially for a meat animal, you've got to call the animal to get the product, and they don't think they could do that. Sorry, William.
Yeah, I think, sorry, another thing sort of related to that, but I think there was a bit of discussion on the forums about human welfare versus animal welfare, and maybe potentially that some humans aren't meeting the 5 freedoms, and so why would animals have to meet them if humans, in our society don't meet them either? And I think this is an issue that we, as animal behavioral scientists or animal welfare scientists, we sort of deal with this on a regular basis because preaching to people about animal welfare is very much only possible if the human welfare is sort of addressed within a given population or within a given country to the best or to a decent standard, I suppose. So yes, people welfare or human welfare might not be 100% ideal in any given situation, but humans do have a choice to some extent anyway. Some people might argue that some people might not have as much choice as others, but in general, people are given the choice to choose what type of lifestyle they'd like to live and to improve their welfare as best they can in their own sort of way. Whereas animals that we keep captive are sort of subject to the way we house them. They don't have a choice to stay with, say if they were with Laura, they don't have a choice to stay with her or go into a housing system with me. So if they're under Laura's care, that's it. That's all they get. So the lack of choice means that we have a responsibility, a moral obligation to keep the birds that we, or the animals that we keep captive, to keep them sort of in the best way possible. Probably given from a utilitarian point of view, but at least meeting the 5 freedoms is sort of like a minimum standard, as to what Laura was saying previously. And then obviously, if you have a smaller scale of say pet animals, then obviously you can probably afford to provide them an even better life than just meeting the 5 freedoms. So yeah, human and animal welfare, definitely there's some dichotomy there, but yeah, we sort of do the best for humans and animals, each in turn, would be an ideal world.
And that's something people have said to me when you're discussing, your career choices and what you do. And I've received criticism that, how can you devote so much time to animal welfare when there's still so much human welfare issues out there? And it is difficult. You choose your battles and what's important. And obviously, I'm fortunate. I come from, a place where human welfare is quite good. So then does leave you more time to think about the welfare of other creatures and to make that more of a priority. But it is a difficult sell. I was in China last year, and you'll see in upcoming lectures that Asia is, I think, the largest producer of poultry at the moment. But they also have very low human welfare standards. And so preaching to them or giving them lectures about I gave them a lecture about chicken welfare, poultry welfare, both layers and broilers. And it's just a difficult sell for them to start thinking about how to improve the welfare of these animals and to house them better when so many of the humans there are living in really poor conditions and really unsanitary conditions. And so it is something that has to be kind of done in conjunction with an improvement with human welfare, because you can't expect them to reach these even 5 freedom standards when so much of the population is below that themselves.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed.
Easy comment.
Is there a difference the law looks at animal welfare? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that question. Do you mean that?
You can actually click on it. I think then you can see.
Okay. Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Everybody can see it. So, the law does take into account animal welfare. Obviously, the laws depend on the country you're living in. In the UK, we have the Animal Welfare Act, which came into effect, I think, in 2006. And it does require, it's not just for farm animals, it refers to basically all animals under any kind of human care, and even some wild animals, but that you're interacting with, or you're in the environment or sharing an environment with, that you have to afford them a basic level of care. Unfortunately, laws are usually written quite ambiguously, so that the basic level of care is never really well defined. It just has to then be interpreted by the people, the lawyers, the judges, whatnot. And this is fairly unique to the UK. I mean, in a lot of countries, animals are still classed as chattel under the law, so it's property. And so obviously doing damage to a property and doing damage to a living being gives you different degrees of severity in the law. And, oh, sorry, is it? Oh, pet chickens versus commercial chickens. That's a difficult one, because kind of yes and no. Overall, no, it should just be looking at the animal as the animal, and whatever the complaint was or the charge was against the animal. But there are leniencies. Leniencies might not be the right word. There are differences in a large system compared to, say, if just somebody saw your pet chicken in the backyard and they were quite concerned about how it was being cared for. So in theory, under the Animal Welfare Act, every animal should be looked at as an individual. But then under kind of more government standards, there are allowances expected for, say, a certain number of mortalities or a certain number of injuries, which would probably be seen as less acceptable for a pet animal. Or if somebody came across, your chicken in your backyard with a broken leg, and it wasn't being treated, that could be, brought up under the law, whereas in a commercial system, well, one, it's very unlikely that a layperson will be walking through and finding injured birds because of biosecurity as well as other reasons. So yes, there are differences in the way they look at them. There's also differences depending on how many birds you keep. So if you have, say, flocks under 200 birds, then you fall into a certain another kind of level of the law or different level, and kind of the more birds you get, they do make allowances that things are going to happen that you're not always going to be able to catch, and it's more that you shouldn't be having a really high mortality, or you shouldn't be finding high level of birds already dead because I think something's going wrong. So it'd kind of be more in conjunction with your veterinary inspector, government officials, because farms are inspected. Not every day, but they do get inspections, and there are records when they should be submitting mortality records and whatnot, so that there should be an indication of when there's a problem. And it's kind of done more in a way to try to help the farmer improve, so not because we want them to come forward when they have a problem to improve things. You're trying not to persecute them or trying to make them feel negative about it. You want them to be comfortable to talk about it so they can improve it and not be afraid that they're going to be charged with something and then just try to hide the problem. Sorry, I'm blabbing. You go ahead.
Yeah, agreed. I'll give the easy comment again.
And law is difficult as well, because even if you've got clear cases of animal abuse, the penalties for it still seem to be quite low. And I mean, they are getting better, and it does depend on case by case, but more often than not at this point, it's more of a slap on the wrist anyway, whether that's for a pet or for a commercial scaled industry, that if somebody has been found guilty, they're not, it's just going to be, a fine or the ban from owning animals for a certain amount of time or something to that effect. It's not going to be, they're not going to be sentenced to jail for things like that in general. We had a comment come in. The cost of medical treatment can be prohibitive. We took one of our chickens to see a vet this week. The main consultation fee plus the prescription cost was 4 to 5 times the value of the hen. That's definitely correct, and I wouldn't even limit that just to chickens. Dogs are very expensive too. Yeah, and that's obviously one of the problems with commercial farming as well, or anyone who has a larger number of birds, that the birds themselves aren't monetarily worth a lot, and the vet fees are quite expensive. So unless you are treating this as purely a pet, and as a pet owner, you just kind of have to accept that you're going to be paying a lot of money for these animals and not getting a lot back from them aside from the obvious companionship and love. But yes, obviously that's why in a lot of cases, especially in production systems, you would cull the animal.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah. So you wouldn't necessarily see treatment of individual animals on a commercial production system. Potentially you might see sort of mass medication if that can be addressed on a flock basis. But you wouldn't see one animal being taken out and being treated as such. Some farms do have sick pens where they do take out animals that they see that potentially would recover if they were just kind of kept separate from the general population. But actual treatment within the sick pen, I think it's pretty much non-existent. So it's just a matter of if the bird can recover while they're sort of isolated from the bigger general group, then they can be reintroduced. But if not, then it will be sort of culling or humane killing would be the next best option. And sorry, just one more thing.
No.
That is coming up in week 5 as well. So sort of how to deal with sick or injured animals in a backyard situation, but as well as obviously our focus is mainly on commercial production because that's where the majority of the animals are. So you will see sort of this type of issue and discussion coming up in week 5 as well. So wait till tomorrow morning. I guess, and you'll see a bit more.
Actually, midnight tonight if you're 9 our time zone. In the U.S., we have the NPIP inspection program. Do you know what that stands for? And is it for commercial farms, or is it for like accredited farms, or is it just farms in general that get inspected? If you wouldn't mind following up with that. Oops.
I've not heard of that. But that's not necessarily surprising because I haven't heard of everything, and also not entirely familiar with everything that happens in the States anyway. But yeah, if you could mention a bit more, that'd be helpful. Or if it's just a general comment, then move on. But
Well, actually, wasn't the one thing I was wanted to mention that came up in the forum, so I think it's an interesting topic because we are starting to, and I thought we were going to be able to talk for an hour. Look at us go. One of the questions that was in the forum was talking about broodiness in hens and kind of the welfare concerns if you stop a broody hen. So Vicky mentioned, ways to break broodiness or stop a broody hen, to stop her from sitting on the clutch of eggs. And is this a welfare issue? Because obviously at this point she's motivated to brood the hens, and it could actually be, someone could argue it actually could even be positive for her to brood a clutch of eggs. And I find this interesting because I could kind of argue both sides of this. That yes, if the hen is quite motivated to brood and she's got her clutch of eggs, and you stop her via one way or the other, then yes, she's potentially going to feel frustrated. She's still potentially going to have that motivation that's not being fulfilled. Perhaps it'll redirect to other behaviors or abnormal behaviors. But then I could also argue that if you had a hen who's brooding unfertilized eggs and she's sitting there and she's not eating and she's losing weight, that this is also a welfare issue. And also it's potentially frustrating for her when the eggs aren't hatching as she's expecting them to and she's not getting the feedback from the chicks. So, I mean, I couldn't give you a yes or no answer for whether just stopping broodiness is a welfare issue. Probably depends on a lot of individual circumstances. Do you want to?
well, yeah, and I
disagree with me?
Agreed. No, I do agree with what you're saying. I think if it comes down to an individual hen and deciding whether it's worse to let her sit on a clutch of eggs that doesn't hatch and feel frustrated that way, or whether it's worse to stop the broodiness, I think that's something that you'd have to weigh out cost-benefit analysis to do that. Obviously, at some point, if it's that you leave her on the eggs and they don't hatch and she feels frustrated, of course, that's going to negatively impact her welfare. But if you take her away from the eggs and sort of stop the broodiness, then that will negatively impact her welfare. Then you kind of have to say, well, what's the better of the two evils, I guess. So yeah, either way you could say, like Laura was saying, you could argue both ways, or either way. And at the end of the day, potentially, no matter what you do, you could be negatively impacting her welfare. So yeah, you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt and say, well, which is the best?
Yeah, which does the least harm.
Yeah.
And I mean, just out of interest as well, broodiness isn't an issue in most commercial flocks, and that's not because they specifically chose to breed broodiness out of these birds. It's because broodiness was genetically linked with other factors that are breeding for, like egg size, number of eggs produced, and so on. So if you have birds who are maybe more related to commercial lines, they shouldn't be that motivated, or they shouldn't tend to go broody. If they do, I wouldn't imagine they'd be as highly motivated to sit on the clutch as maybe more natural strain or bird where this hasn't been selected for at all.
Does Scotland have a national floor and poultry inspection program?
Not as far as I know. We do have inspection programs. They do tend to be either government mediated or a lot of them are actually done by the supermarket chains or the receivers of the goods, if you will, the people who are going to be selling the goods. So, depending on which farm you work for, you might supply, say, one grocery store, and people from that grocery store would come out and inspect your farm to make sure it met certain standards, which may actually be better than what the regular basic standards or the 5 freedoms would require. And there are government people involved as well. But I think a lot of it actually does tend to be just through the retailers and their assurance programs, because they are quite keen to make sure that the public is getting the product that they think they're getting, or that's being advertised and sold to them.
Yeah, a lot of the farms that I've visited, they do have quite a few auditors coming through on a regular basis. I think some of the auditing schemes, as well as the government audits or the line code audits, are either every 6 months, every 12 months, or I think there's some that are even every 18 months. Mm-hmm. But then when you've got a number of accreditations that you're trying to fulfill, then these visits can sort of seem to occur maybe every couple of months. So you do get, a lot of the bigger firms especially will have quite a few accreditations to their name and will have auditors coming through on a regular basis. So I don't know whether we have sort of a national quorum poultry. I've never heard that specific phrase before, but like Laura was saying, we do have sort of governmental egg inspectors as well as the retailers going through and the line code as well. So
And we have a website up which hopefully you can all see. I'm not able to actually click on it the way it is here, but I'll look at that later. Thank you for providing that. And we have a hybrid that went pretty last year, and she went on to hatch out chicks from purchased fertile eggs. And that's actually a really good idea to buy fertile eggs for her. It would have been actually quite nice to see. I'm very interested in this kind of natural maternal behavior with the hens because we don't see it a lot, obviously, in production. And there's the potential that we are also accidentally linking some negative behaviors, perhaps. Part of feather pecking may stem from a lack of being with the mother hen.
it would teach them where to
What,
feed and
yeah,
what's
what's
appropriate to peck
appropriate
at.
to feed and what's appropriate to peck at, which they're obviously missing out. So that sounds really like a very good idea. If you do have a broody hen that you're happy to let be broody, and then you get some extra chicks, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I guess we can wrap up for today, unless anyone has any more burning questions. We better check them in quickly. But yeah, I think we've reached the end of our sort of our hour slot as well as sort of what we had lined up to discuss today. So thank you all for joining us.
Yes,
And,
thank you. And if you do think of questions later, you can always pop them on the forum, and we'll try to get to them. And do apologize that we can't answer every post or every query in the forum. There's only really 2 of us doing it, and limited hours a day. Both actually have other jobs as well. But we do try to get to them. But it seems like you guys are really good at kind of doing the discussions yourselves and responding to your own posts. And I've looked at some, and there's no need for me to answer because you guys are doing a really good job of responding to each other.
And in some cases, you might even know more about the topic than we do anyway, because you are the ones that have the backyard hens, and unfortunately, we don't.
Yeah, Darren bias and here. All right, well, thank you, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Yeah, I think same time next week, same place. Well, different link, but we'll post it on Coursera. Okay. Yeah. See you next week, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.